Thank you for everyone who's tuning in today. We are going to be welcoming Eileen all the way from the UK to talk about afternoon tea. I definitely made the mistake of calling it high tea the first time I reached out to her, and we'll learn about why that's not actually the proper thing. But we're so excited to have you here. We're so excited to be representing the Whittemore House with you as well, and to have you again calling all the way in from over there. So I guess you can kind of just kick it off. I have a couple questions and we'll just start to go through it.
Yes, perfect. Well, it's great to be here and thank you so much for inviting me. I'd love to talk about afternoon tea and share my experiences. So I know you have a few questions, so I'll let you start.
Absolutely. So do you think you could kind of talk to me a little bit about the history of afternoon tea, really where it began and where that tradition kind of started off?
Sure. So I suppose in order for us to fully understand where afternoon tea came from, we have to understand the importance of tea within UK culture. So tea itself became really popular in the sort of mid 1600s, ultimately through the trade that the UK was doing through China and through India. So the tea passage, or the Silk Road as it was known. So tea started to become more popular, and it was really a luxury. And when it first came to the UK, people were very skeptical about it. They actually encouraged people to drink alcohol versus tea because they weren't sure about some of the properties in tea. So even children, as maybe 11, they would have preferred to give a child gin rather than tea because they were so unsure about what this tea was. And it really wasn't until the 1660s when King Charles II married Catherine de Braganza from Portugal. So she came up from Portugal with tea cases, and I'm sure that you know the kind of modern day effect that the royal family has. So say when Meghan Markle wears something, everyone suddenly gets really interested, and she really had the same effect with tea. So tea was starting to become very much established within the upper classes, and that's really changed people's opinion of it. So fast forward to sort of the 1830s, 1840s, that's when ladies started to drink tea more often in their own private rooms. They would have their own tea cases, which would have been under lock and key. And it was around 1841, actually, that a letter was written from Anna, Duchess of Bedford, talking about how she was experiencing a sinking feeling in the afternoon. And she requested for some cake and scones to be sent to her room. So technically she invented it, but as these things sort of evolve and actresses heard of it, so a famous actress at the time called Fanny Kemble heard about it, and she started to kind of invite some of her socialite friends, and really it just snowballed from there. It wasn't until about the 1860s where hotels started to offer it. I suppose it went through a little bit of a decline and it was seen as more of an older person thing, but definitely in the past 5 years, it's become so popular in the UK again. And even during this lockdown period, so many people have been asking me about tips for afternoon tea at home. So I know a lot of people are still having afternoon tea.
They have to have it. Well, can you tell me a little bit about, because I have seen that revival, and even when I was traveling, I had a lot of friends who still saw this as like a luxury, or you'd want to take that kind of nice tea break in the afternoon. Why do you think it's been kind of brought back into modern day? And also I even see, people of all ages being engaged and interested in it. So what's kind of brought back that revival?
I think I've noticed especially the use of social media has really, really brought afternoon tea back. So Instagram, that's really how I started, was on Instagram, and I started Afternoon Tea London, just photographing all these beautiful teas, and chefs then started to feel under pressure to make their afternoon tea even more beautiful, and themed teas. So you'll see there's a science afternoon tea with dry ice in London.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. There is a wizarding, we can't say Harry Potter, wizarding afternoon tea, which is a whole experience where you get to wear a robe. People have really gone and made these into real experiences. So definitely social media. And then I think because some younger people don't really want to drink alcohol and they want something different to do in the afternoon, so health reasons as well, although I don't know how healthy cake is, but
You know, they kind of cancel each other out. It's fine, that glass of wine, that piece of cake, whatever. Well,
exactly.
that's awesome. What would you say in terms of kind of the tradition, I guess, of afternoon tea in the UK? Is it mostly a time to socialize? Would somebody have afternoon tea on their own? Or is it kind of always a group gathered experience?
It's normally a group gathered experience. The whole kind of point of it is to really meet up with friends. It's supposed to be a very leisurely affair, and I suppose because the food is cold, there's no rush. So you don't feel like you have to kind of leave at a certain time. You know, I've been at afternoon tea that started at 4 and we didn't finish until nearly 7 because, you know, you just want to catch up with your friends and talk and see people. I have seen people in London have afternoon tea by themselves. I think it's more that maybe they're just visiting and they maybe didn't have someone to go with at that time. But normally it's a social affair. Birthdays is a big one for afternoon tea because it's quite special. So you'll imagine that sort of London is the kind of pinnacle for afternoon tea, and a lot of people would travel to London for the weekend, and one of the highlights of their trip would be an afternoon tea. So very popular.
And did afternoon tea kind of fully, so I've traveled to areas like in New Zealand before, for example, or even in parts of Australia and seen like an afternoon tea type of model in some of the hotels. Maybe they're appealing more to, again, like a tourist industry, but would you say that it really did kind of fully originate there and now has passed along, I guess, kind of spread out to other similar countries as well?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, when I travel, so for example, I went to Iceland last
Oh,
summer,
yeah.
and I was really surprised that one of the hotels offered afternoon tea. So I think it's a combination of people are really fascinated with British culture and kind of understanding that tradition, but also, and this is the less romantic side, hotels have a gap to fill after lunchtime and between dinner. So there's that kind of commercial aspect for it as well. But ultimately, I think that, you know, some countries will do it and they'll put their own twist on it, and it's really lovely to see them use, you know, local ingredients in some of the sandwiches, for example. It's great to see.
And I guess before we jump into some of the differences between the ways that maybe I perceive it or that it actually is, you know,
Yeah.
afternoon tea, high tea, all of that. Do you mind telling me a little bit about what got you interested in into becoming this afternoon tea expert?
Yeah, I mean, I when I was growing up, we tea's a big culture in the UK, and I was always quite curious about tea as a drink and an afternoon tea. I mean, what young girl does not love to go to a hotel and relax and be, you know, be served lovely plates of sandwiches? But I mean, ultimately, it was when I first moved to London, and I just really wanted to explore different places, and I set up an Instagram account, and the more places I started to go, and I was invited into so many hotels, you know, that I really kind of had a scale of differences in terms of, you know, the different quality and different levels. And as the brand started to grow and more people asked me for recommendations, I felt, you know, very strongly that I would only give the best recommendations because, as I said earlier, people travel just for afternoon tea. So you want to make sure that they have a good time. But I just really researched the topic so much, and I find it totally fascinating. It's just there's so much to learn about it, and it changes all the time. So some hotels have started to incorporate high tea elements into the traditional afternoon tea. So, you know, it's always changing, but, you know, ultimately it's not so different to when Anna relaxed with her friends. It's just that nice tradition that we have. And I think when I started the events, it was really to bring people together and kind of have that sort of interaction with different people who just love afternoon tea.
Yeah, we definitely get the events side over here, so that's great. And I wish that you could be over here right now. I feel like the Whittemore House would be a perfect venue for that.
Oh, I know. I'd love
Maybe
to
one
come.
time in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's a reason why all of our guests are so excited to actually learn and hear what you have to say about this. So, speaking of, I guess, some of that research on afternoon tea, I know I've always heard, and I mentioned this in the beginning, that it's referred to as high tea. And I was definitely corrected, but could you talk a little bit about what the difference is there? What does it mean to recommend the right things about afternoon tea, and what's a real authentic experience?
Okay, so this is a long topic. So let me explain in detail. Okay, so afternoon tea and high tea, from my perspective and in the UK, are two different things. It's a bit like, I suppose, American English. There's words that you will use like wallet that we'll call a purse, but it's the same thing. High tea and afternoon tea, you can't really do that, because if you go into a venue and ask for high tea and they have both high tea and afternoon tea on the menu, you might not get what you expected. There's actually a third, which is worth mentioning, is a cream tea. So I'll explain all three. So we'll start with the cream tea. That's the easiest. Cream tea is tea and scones. So it's quite a simple dish. Hotels do serve it. You would usually have it in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, but it's quite small and simple. It's generally an unplanned affair and less formal. Afternoon tea is what you call high tea. So it is your scones, your sandwiches, and your pastries. So it's 3 courses. Generally, it's served, the kind of considered the tea time would be 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, although hotels do serve it from maybe 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. High tea, on the other hand, to explain the contents that that meal would include, it's a lot heavier than afternoon tea. So it would still include sandwiches and maybe a cake, but it would also include things like a pie or a quiche or like cheeses or meats, things that you would expect to see at dinner time. So they are different things. I'll go on and explain why this has happened. So we always talked about afternoon tea with Anna, Duchess of Bedford. And as I mentioned at the start, tea was just very important in our culture throughout from the 1600s. So afternoon tea traditionally, the difference you can tell was served on a low table. It was less formal, whereas high tea would have been a much later meal served on a high table. So that's sort of where the difference of high comes from. Yeah. So high tea would have been served on a higher table. Now there's a few myths around where the words high tea have come from. So that's sort of the main difference. 2 things would have been the type of food served at afternoon tea was sometimes like easy to prepare things that could be served cold. So people have said that that was done so that the servants could have a night off, so that the high tea would be served. There wasn't much for the people of the house to do. They didn't have to carve anything. It was just easy. So that's one myth. I say myths because we don't exactly know. The second one is when the average working man would have come home to his evening meal, he would have called it his tea, because he would have had a pot of really strong tea on the table, plus the pie or piece of bread, whatever he may have had for dinner. So some people in the north of England still refer to their evening meal as tea. So I know that's quite a bit of information that I've just given you. Oh my gosh.
Well, I actually had a really good friend when I was traveling, and he would always ask me if I wanted to get tea, or me and my friends. And for the longest time, I had no idea if he was just being a classic or cliche British person or what he was talking about. So that makes a lot of sense. I wish I had known.
Yeah, so some people will still call the evening meal tea, even though they don't drink tea. That's just where it's stuck. I suppose since it's been exported, some of the meaning has kind of gotten lost, but I have spoken to a few people who, one Canadian lady in particular that runs high tea parties, and she told me that she understands the difference, but because people think high tea sounds fancier, that that's better or different. So I suppose it's just a bit of lost in translation. But one thing I will say, if you come to London and you want what you think you want is high tea, have a look at afternoon tea menus, because you might be served a piece of pie that you might not want. But also some hotels will advertise high tea because they are trying to appeal to the tourist market. So you don't want to fall into maybe a bit of a tourist trap.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Well, it's good that now I actually know the proper way to do it whenever I go and travel to London, hopefully soon once this travel ban is up.
Yes,
Um,
fingers crossed.
well, okay, so I don't have a teacup here, but I do
Ah,
have a coffee mug. And
okay.
I thought maybe you could at least try to show me on this how I would have a proper cup of tea and maybe how I would hold it. Do I pinky up? I'm guessing I don't, but
Okay, let me show you. So I have a teacup here. So I'll just talk you through a few rules. So when you're seated, your tea saucer stays on the table, okay? So only if you stand up, you lift your saucer. So I'm sitting, so for the purpose of this exercise, I will put the saucer down, okay? Now, there's different ways to hold the teacup. Let me hold this up so you can see. So
yeah.
you don't do this, okay? You don't do this. What you do is you pinch and then you let all your fingers fall underneath. So they should support, if that makes sense.
Oh, that looks so elegant. Okay, so in theory, if this wasn't such a big handle, it would be
It
all
could
of them on it like this.
pretty much, it's probably when it's a heavier mug, you can't really do it because it's heavy, but yeah, you just pinch. And one thing I will say, no. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story of why that you shouldn't do this. So there are a few reasons behind where this pinky finger comes from. So some people said it was when the sort of upper classes were served food by their servants. They didn't physically want to touch the food because they thought the servants were dirty. So they tried to hold the sandwich with as little fingers as possible, hence fingers sticking out. Obviously that's quite rude. So that sort of, that was one reason. Another reason was apparently if you were a lady in court and you saw someone that you found attractive, to signal to them, you would sort of give them a little pinky in their direction. Who knew? There's other like quite gross ones around hankies and the lack of them. And
oh no.
yeah, so we'll not talk about that one. But then the final one, and the one which once I tell you, you will never do this again, okay? So
Okay.
the final point is in the French court of the times of Louis the 16th, it was used to, not so much with teacups, but with wine glasses or champagne flutes, to indicate that you were suffering from a sexually transmitted disease. So sorry, but
So never put my pinky up ever again.
exactly. So, you know, I see it a lot that people say pinkies up, pinkies out, and no, that's it just sort of makes you appear unrefined. So I would definitely recommend not to do that.
Which is ironic because everyone always jokes about how it makes you the most refined for doing it.
Well, exactly. So you know the secret of why you shouldn't do it.
I'm glad I learned that earlier on rather than later. Well, that's super funny, but also really interesting. Before we kind of close things out and talking through all of this, I'm wondering, so being at home, I don't have all the stuff that I need. I don't have all of the selections of tea in the world, but do you have any recommendations for maybe how to brew a good cup or any ratios, something that our viewers could take and actually utilize at home as well.
Exactly. So this weekend, I am actually going to host my own tea party in my garden by myself. But I am going to set it up so that you can do it, that you don't need all of the equipment, as you say. So what I will do is just serve black tea. I think everyone should have black tea at home. So if you have loose black tea, what you want to do is use 1 teaspoon per cup. So a cup this size of cup, maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon would be perfect. And just have fun with it. It's so great, I think, for people to drink tea, whether it's loose leaf or tea bag. So whatever you have at home you can work with. If you have a teapot, amazing, use your teapot. Just remember to take the tea bag, remove it before you serve, because you don't want to overbrew the tea. That would be my tip.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today and for calling in again all the way from the UK. I know I took a ton from this, mostly things I shouldn't do to look like an ignorant American, but it was super fascinating. Again, this is the UK tea expert, afternoon tea expert, and I'll be sharing her website and sending it out to everyone along with this webinar. Please, if you go and visit London or even just want to get in touch for your own events, definitely get in touch with Eileen. So thank you, Eileen, so much again for joining me.
Thank you. It was lovely and great to catch up, and hopefully someday after lockdown, I'll be able to visit the States and try high tea.
Yes, you will, and you'll have to do it at the Whittemore House. So we'll see you here. We'll have a host.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.